Welcome to the Times of Israel's daily briefing. Today is Wednesday, July 23rd, day 656 of the war. Amanda Borschel-Dan here with our legal and settlements reporter, Jeremy Sharon, and with our newly minted political correspondent, Ariela Karmel. Thank you both for joining me.
Thanks, Amanda. Happy to be here.
Good to be with you, Amanda.
So Jeremy is going to give us a brief update on the unsurprising results of the vote in the committee to dismiss the Attorney General and what are the next steps forward. We'll also learn about the stated reason for why Israel is taking control of the tomb of the patriarch's holy site in Hebron. Ariela will fill us in on what happened yesterday during a Knesset conference called the Gaza Riviera, From Vision to Reality. And to close out, Ariela will fill us in on a new potential threat facing Canadian-Israeli soldiers, investigations for their actions during the Gaza war when they return to Canada. So all of this and more when we're back. I'm Amanda Borschel-Dan here with our legal and settlements reporter, Jeremy Sharon, and our political correspondent, Ariela Karmel. So, Jeremy, let's quickly do an update on the saga of the attempts to fire Attorney General Gali Baharav-Miara. And on Sunday morning, the 5-member ministerial committee recently set up to dismiss the Attorney General voted unanimously to recommend that the government dismiss the Attorney General. So there was no surprise there with the result. She, of course, didn't show up to 2 scheduled hearings last week, so the actual vote was moved from Thursday to Sunday. And so now that the committee's foregone conclusion has passed in that committee, what happens?
So the next step is basically for the government to put it on the agenda of a cabinet meeting, and then for the cabinet essentially to vote on whether or not to adopt the recommendation of the ministerial committee and fire the Attorney General. So that could happen at the next cabinet meeting. It's really a very explosive issue because the Attorney General is really one of the key, so-called gatekeepers and guardians of the rule of law in Israel. And to fire her is to fire the Attorney General, who's also the head of the prosecution and tells the government what is legal, defines and interprets for the government if its actions are legal. It's a really big deal. And making it more of a big deal is the fact that many government ministers are saying that if the High Court of Justice rules that this process was invalid, then they just want to ignore what the High Court says. So we are talking again about constitutional crisis territory. I think that the situation is definitely a very kind of explosive. And the High Court has already said that if the government does fire the Attorney General, that decision will not go into effect immediately while the court reviews petitions against the process. And that's already going to create conflict. And I've already seen reports that some ministers have said, in internal discussions that they're just going to try, they'll just exclude the Attorney General from cabinet meetings and from other critical governmental forums as basically a de facto firing, even if the court says that her dismissal is frozen. So again, I think this is a serious situation, and we'll see it develop over the next few days, and especially in particular, we'll see whether it comes up on the agenda for this Sunday's cabinet meeting.
Okay, Ariel, let's turn to you. And yesterday at the Knesset, Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich endorsed a, quote, security annexation of the northern Gaza Strip. And he also claimed that IDF Forces Chief of Staff Eyal Zamir favors the idea. He said that Gaza would become, quote, an inseparable part of the state of Israel. And this conference was called, of course, the Gaza Riviera, From Vision to Reality. I just want to remind our listeners that 20 years ago, next month, the state of Israel pulled out of the Gaza Strip. And so it's kind of astounding to me to see so many government forces inside this conference essentially calling for it to be undone. So who was at this conference, first of all, Ariela?
So this conference was held yesterday at the Knesset. It was organized by members of Bezalel Smotrich's religious Zionism party, as well as from Otzma Yehudit, which is Itamar Ben-Gvir's far-right party. He was the most high-ranking official in attendance as the finance minister, but there were MKs from multiple parties in attendance, municipal councils, and also activists for whom the resettlement and annexation of Gaza is their primary objective. So it was quite a large gathering, and it is the fulfillment of what is in the view of Bezalel Smotrich and members of his party of righting a historical wrong, which is how they view the Gaza disengagement in 2005. And he claimed, which was quite an extraordinary claim, that the chief of staff, Eyal Zamir of the army, supported annexation in the north. To be clear, Smotrich is calling for annexation of the entire territory, and they spoke at this conference about what that would entail, universities and cities that would be built, solving Israel's housing crisis, etc., by annexing the entire territory. But it's not clear from the IDF, they haven't commented on the matter, whether in fact that exchange took place and whether the chief of staff really does support annexation in at least the northern part of the territory.
So another figure that Smotrich claims also supports this idea is U.S. President Donald Trump. And Smotrich said, "We have great support from the President of the United States to turn Gaza into a prosperous strip, a resort town with employment. That's how you make peace." I don't believe that the White House has confirmed that as well, but it does play into the Trump plan, or at least proposition to relocate the Gazans. And Ariel, do you have any sense that the government is actually acting on that plan right now?
So certainly the entire concept and the title, the Gaza Riviera, was taken from the president, who posted an interesting AI video on his Truth Social network in February depicting his vision for the Gaza Riviera. And it's something that the White House has repeatedly discussed, although it has been several months since that was proposed. In terms of actual advancement on the matter, there hasn't been any indication that the government is pursuing operations to annex the territory and to put into implement these plans. The purpose of this conference was really to establish a vision for what annexation would look like and hopefully to advance those plans. But it remains unclear whether the White House would actually endorse them in practice. And in recent weeks, actually, there have been more negative comments from the president in terms of what has been going on the ground in Gaza relating to aid distribution and also deaths at those aid distribution sites.
So today in the Knesset, there is meant to be a vote, a declarative vote, pushing for the annexation of the West Bank as well. Jeremy, we had this, of course, last year too. Do you see the confluence of these two events, this Gaza Riviera conference and, of course, the declarative vote on the annexation of the West Bank, as a signal of a trend in the halls of the Knesset?
I think so. I think definitely there is, in the Knesset and in Israeli society in general, much greater opposition to the idea that there could be an independent and sovereign Palestinian state. And we saw, as you said, we saw last year, there was a vote in the Knesset, I think it was 68-9, again, a declarative vote opposing a Palestinian state. This government has, especially with Bezalel Smotrich, made tremendous efforts to advance the de facto annexation of the West Bank in terms of the great application of Israeli civilian law there, of expanding the settlements, of expropriating more land, of building more settlement outposts. And I think that's all part of what we've seen, especially since October 7th, of within Israeli society, just a really emptying out of support of the idea that there can be an independent Palestinian state. And when you have the vacuum of that idea, then you get its counterpart, which is, well, let's just annex everything. And I think what will be interesting in the vote today is to see which of the opposition parties, or which MKs from the opposition parties, vote in favor. Because in the vote last year against the Palestinian state, we saw even MKs from Benny Gantz's National Unity Party, which is supposedly a centrist party, voting in favor of opposing a Palestinian state. So, and in fact, the Yesh Atid, which is a centrist party, and Labour, which is a left-wing party, they didn't even participate in the vote. And I think that shows you how sensitive and delicate the issue is of a Palestinian state within Israeli society, that even a left-wing party is not willing to stick its neck back out and say, yeah, we support a Palestinian state, because it's such political, dynamite, is political suicide almost, to say that you support a Palestinian state, because the right wing is just going to come back at you and say you support, you're promoting a terrorist state and you're promoting the next October 7th. So as I said, I think seeing which opposition parties and MKs vote in favor today will be very instructive.
All right, please check out our live blog for updates on this. Let's go to a short break. And we're back. I'm Amanda Borschel-Dan here with our legal and settlements reporter, Jeremy Sharon, and Knesset reporter, Ariela Karmel. So Israeli authorities have said that they are taking control of the management of the Tomb of the Patriarch's holy site in Hebron in order to carry out construction work at the Flashpoint West Bank Shrine. So we've actually been in this situation before, but we're hearing condemnations from the Palestinian Authority and United Arab Emirates, who Ramallah said, for example, that it would constitute, quote, an unprecedented step in the occupation's measures to impose its sovereignty over the mosque, Judaize it, and completely alter its identity and features. But I recall several years ago a very similar situation in which a disabled-friendly elevator was attached to this tomb, which, just to remind our listeners, was built during Herod's time. So we're talking about 2,000 years ago or so. So Jeremy, talk to us about why is this causing such a ruckus right now if we have already been in this situation before?
Right. So, I mean, to start with, I think any issue of administration over the holy sites, shared holy sites, obviously, is always going to cause concern and outrage and all different types of condemnation. And obviously, the Tomb of the Patriarchs, which is also the Ibrahimi Mosque for Muslims, is a very sensitive site. It's for Jews and for Muslims, it's the burial site of the patriarchs and the matriarchs. So that's just to start with. In this situation as well, I think what's happened is that there's also reports not only that Israel is taking control, or Israeli authorities are taking administrative control of the site, but that administrative control is also passing to the religious council of the Kiryat Arba Hebron settlement. Every Israeli town and city has what's called a religious council, which manages religious services in that municipality, and which manages also the holy sites, or sometimes manage holy sites which fall within its jurisdiction. And obviously for Muslims, and for the Palestinians, for the religious council of the Kiryat Arba Hebron settlement to be managing the Tomb of the Patriarchs would be very worrying. What I should say is that it's not clear that is in fact the case, that this religious council of Kiryat Arba Hebron will be managing the site. The civil administration, which is a unit within the Defense Ministry, they told me that they are overseeing the management of any construction which is going to be carried out. And in fact, that's what happened in that episode which you mentioned of the installation of the disabled access elevator a few years ago. The civil administration then took the authority from the Palestinian Hebron municipality and the Waqf, which administers the site usually. They took the authority, they carried out the construction, which by itself is still very controversial, and not particularly sightly, I should say. They carried out the construction, and it seems that then they returned the authority to the Hebron Municipal Council and the Waqf. The civil administration says that the same thing is going to happen now, that they've got the authority to carry out, they're going to build I think some kind of shade or canopy construction in a courtyard where I think especially Jews pray in the Tomb of the Patriarchs complex. And I was also told that after that, the management authority will be restored to the previous administrators. And they said the reason that they're doing this is because the Hebron municipality and the Waqf are not simply not cooperating in terms of doing upgrades to the site, such as the shade canopy, such as the elevator before it, and that's the reasons. But the one other thing I would say is that I think definitely activists in Hebron, the Jewish settlement within Hebron itself, and right-wing activists more generally have for a long time been trying to assert more control over the management of the Tomb of the Patriarchs. It's a very important national symbol, a very important religious symbol, and by taking control administratively to do the construction work, it bolsters and boosts Israel's claims to manage the site more generally, as opposed to what the situation has been for many years, where the Palestinian Hebron Municipal Council and the Waqf have been in charge.
Do you have any sense of the timeline on this, Jeremy, when the construction is meant to start and stop? And then, of course, double it, because we're in Israel. You have to double all construction times.
Not exactly. The last I heard, which the civil administration told me, is that the bureaucratic process to take the authority from the previous administrators and bring it within the Israeli civil administration is in its final straits, and then after that, I guess the construction can be conducted. By the sound of it, it's not something very complicated or even a very big project. So in theory, it wouldn't take a long time. But as you said, this is Israel, and whatever you're told by the contractor, pretty much double it.
All right, Ariela, let's turn back to you. And in June, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police announced that it had opened an investigation into, quote, matters related to the Israel-Hamas armed conflict, with the possibility of uncovering, quote, a perpetrator of core international crimes such as genocide, war crimes, or crimes against humanity. Now, that's a pretty open mandate. And so how are Israeli Canadian soldiers understanding this, and what is worrying them before they go back home to see their families?
So the statement, which to date has been the sole statement released by the RCMP on the matter, provoked a lot of alarm, both among the Jewish community in Canada and also among Canadian Israeli soldiers, both current and former. Even though the statement does not explicitly refer to any particular group, it is not explicitly an investigation into Israelis or into IDF soldiers. But there was a lack of clarity for a long time about the statement. And it was only after, I think, a lot of prompting from Jewish communal organizations that the statement was released. And it is notably the first time that the RCMP has ever opened an investigation of this sort into any conflict relating to Israel or the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. So even though they have assured the Jewish community that, first of all, this isn't a criminal investigation, they are not charging anyone at this point. It's what they call a structural intelligence gathering investigation. There is a lot of concern that it will be applied to Israelis and to servicemen and women. And I don't think that there will be answers on that front for a while, because it's still at a very early stage in the investigation.
Now, when you were investigating this piece, this matter, you spoke with several Israeli Canadian soldiers who were afraid to go back home. And there are also several who mentioned how changed Canada has become. You yourself are Canadian. I am a fake Canadian, just grew up in Canada, have a weird accent, but you have the real accent, the Asli accent, as we say here in Israel. And I wonder, what is your sense in terms of the change in Canada? Do these soldiers actually have grounds for their worry?
So, look, I think there are two things. On the one hand, the investigation has been very firm that they are not investigating soldiers. They've reassured the Jewish community that that is not at all a concern at this point. Having said that, I think that it's reasonable that soldiers have felt this kind of alarm in the context of what has been going on in Canada, which is a massive rise in anti-Semitism, really widespread. It's manifested in also attacks on Jewish communal centers in the last 2 years at record levels, and also in the context of lawfare being used as a tool against IDF soldiers in other countries around the world. And what's notable here is that even though, again, it's not explicitly targeting soldiers, it is the first time that we are aware of that a country is investigating its own citizens for participation in this conflict. Typically soldiers abroad who have been persecuted, whether in Brazil, most notably, or Cyprus. These were Israelis that were simply traveling in those countries. And so here, the notion that it's citizens of the country that would be investigated has caused, I think, a sense of, as some soldiers said to me, betrayal, abandonment, and fear about what it means about what is going on in Canada and what it reflects about Canadian society. Another important thing to note is that The RCMP told Jewish communal organizations that the investigation was initially started in early 2024 in regards to victims of Hamas atrocities. So they're looking at Canadians who were killed on October 7th, taken hostage, potentially. That's what they were originally investigating. I spoke to soldiers who are both concerned to fly abroad. I spoke to one who decided not to go home at the last minute, and he said it was directly related to this. Other than that, most of the soldiers that I've spoken to are going home right now. They're not in fear of being arrested at the border. There is no evidence to suggest that that would take place. But I can understand how the broader climate of lawfare against Israeli soldiers and anti-Semitism in Canada would lead to that kind of fear.
Ariela, thank you so much for bringing that story. And Jeremy, thank you as well for joining me today.
Pleasure as always.
Thanks, Amanda.
Thanks for listening to the Times of Israel's Daily Briefing. Please check out another installment tomorrow. This episode was produced by the Podwaves. If you have any questions or comments about this or any other episode, please drop us an email to podcast@timesofisrael.com. Until tomorrow, shalom.